The state of our club's blades was an embarrassment, so I and some others decided to do something about it. I've painted nearly 50 blades now, and I'm going to show you how I do it. It's not the only way, and I don't say that it's the best, but it seems to work. First off, I'm using tins of paint put on with brushes. Aerosols are okay, but you have to use acres of newsprint to take care of spray drift, and they're also surprisingly expensive, and the finish isn't particularly durable. I'm using marine paint. You'll also need sandpaper, a paintbrush about 1.5 inches is convenient, some masking tape and something to degrease the surfaces before painting. There's more about choice of products in the notes. If the blades have old paint on them, use the coarser sandpaper initially to smooth them down and remove any loose flakes. But in all cases, even if the blades are new, you've got to sand them all over very carefully with 240 grit. All exposed surfaces develop a thin, invisible film on them made up of dust, chemicals from the atmosphere and microorganisms, and if you don't remove it, paint put on top would simply flake off. When you get towards the end, you want to check carefully that you've got a nice, smooth, even grey surface all over. After sanding, wash the blades down with warm water with a few drops of washing up liquid in it. It's worth giving the shaft, the sleeve, the collar and the handle a scrub too. Club blades don't get cleaned half often enough. The blades may still have traces of grease on them, so wash each one down with automotive panel wash or another suitable solvent. To keep paint off the shaft, run a strip of masking tape round, pushing it into the angle between the shaft and the blade cone. If the paint has a skin on the surface, you must remove it. If you don't, you'll spoil the paint job completely. Use a screwdriver to break the skin all the way around the very edge of the tin. And lift it carefully out. Let it drip for a moment. And then dump it and get rid of it. When you're stirring paint, the objective is to get all the solids that fall to the bottom of the can back into suspension. So don't just twiddle the stirrer in the middle of the tin, scrape round the bottom as well, including the edges, moving the stick up and down as well as round and round, and do it for at least 2 minutes. Finally, we're ready to do the primer. I start where the blade meets the shaft and paint the whole of the edge of the cone, both sides. That's why we need the masking tape. Then I work my way down one face of the blade towards the tip. Once you've used your chosen paint for a while, you'll get a feel for how much you can put on without it starting to run. To get a good finish, you want as much paint as you can, but not so much as it gathers into blobs which then become runs. The last and possibly the most important thing to do on all paint jobs is to lay off. Start by lightly brushing the surface evenly all over in one direction, in this case across the blade, and then brush all over at right angles to that even more lightly. This will settle the finish and go a long way to reducing brush strokes. Leave the edges until last. In the same way, paint the other side and lay off again. When painting edges, try to avoid brushing from the edge towards the middle. Instead, either brush along the edge or from the middle outwards. This will reduce the tendency for paint to gather at the edge and start to run. When painting edges, use a dryish brush with a combination of dabbing it vertically and moving side to side. All this is to reduce the likelihood of creating a blob of paint, which will then run when your back is turned. How does that look? Oh, missed a bit. Touch it up, lay off, and we're done. I like to wipe the rim of the paint tin before putting the lid on. It makes it easier to open next time and stops flakes of dried paint falling in later on. Before dunking the brush in solvent, scrape as much paint as you can off it, both sides. It makes cleaning it a lot easier. I'm using an electrician's bolster chisel, but you could use a knife or even a piece of flat wood. Our club's blades have a single stripe, and I've made a cardboard template to make it easier and to ensure that all the blades in a set are the same. If you have stripes, they should be parallel to the tip of the blade. Making them at right angles to the shaft looks very peculiar. Mark the position of the stripe lightly. Extend the lines over the edges. Mark the other side of the blade in the same way. Always work your way from paler colours to darker. The dark paint can then overlay the pale. I don't need to worry about painting up to the lines, in fact it's better to go over a little. Lay off every coat, every time. Now we need to mark where the masking tape is going to go for the stripes. Use your template again. With a fine marking pen, make little ticks on the side of the blade, and then produce them so that you can see them from both sides. Do the same with the other side of the stripe, produce them round so you can see them. Now it's time to mask up for the darker colour. I'm starting here on the front of the blade. I've got a piece of tape holding it in line with the marks on both sides, and then not holding it under tension, pressing it down so it conforms to the concave face of the blade. Sometimes you need to trim the edge of the tape to make sure that it overlaps properly on the other side, doesn't get in the way. Fold the edge of the other edge of the tape down, make it easier to strip. Same this side. Fold the edge of the tape down to make it easier to strip off. Do the same for the other 3 pieces of tape, and make sure that all the edges are pressed down firmly. Start the darker colour at the shaft end of the blade and work towards the tip just as you did for the primer. Wouldn't it be great if we could paint at this speed all the time? When you get to the masking tape, make sure you're painting straight down and overlap onto the tape itself. Lay off, as always. Do the edges in the same way as before. And we're done. It's important to strip the masking tape while the paint is still wet, otherwise you risk damaging the edge. Pull the loose end of the tape with the tape well angled down, almost parallel to the surface. You need to mask up again for the second coat, annoyingly. Use the same process for painting and don't forget to lay off. There, that looks better. All you have to do now is stop your club mates scraping it to shreds again.